right, let's get started now. It's 10:07, September 5th, County Cannabis Working Group meeting. We're short a few people. The County Council's coming in now. And today on our agenda is to discuss the 500 square foot and 5,000 square foot indoor commercial cultivation license type within the manufacturing zones, and discuss the 2,500 square foot outdoor commercial cultivation license type. Let's see. Where shall we start? There's a few things of news that I've been forgetting to talk about. The state was attempting to eliminate the cultivation tax. That did not happen, so the cultivation tax will be going through. There was a measure attempting to require 2/3 vote for all tax measures, and I think that won't go to the ballot. So our tax measure has a better chance of passing in November. So please, everybody, vote for the tax measure in November, cannabis commercial tax. Let's see. Oh, and I wanted to ask Joel about manufacturing, even though that's not on our agenda. And something that I forgot to talk about and bring up when we were in that section is certain kinds of manufacturing that might be appropriate on cultivation sites. And so that may be appropriate in the cultivation discussion also. And I don't know which ordinance or in both this would be in, but there's certain like low intensity manufacturing that might be appropriate. It's almost considered processing, but per the state, these things are defined as manufacturing, like olive oil infusion, for example, might be something that would be appropriate to do on a farm, but would require a manufacturing license. So I just wanted to bring that up before I forget.
Are you thinking like as a micro business or like two separate permit holders on one piece of property?
Correct, yeah. Well, either one, I suppose, but more likely just including a manufacturing license at a cultivation site as required by the state so that you can perform certain manufacturing operations.
Well, I mean, that's, nothing we've really talked about so far would specifically limit the number of permit holders or permitted operations operating on a single parcel. Low intensity manufacturing that's appropriate in an agricultural zone. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I don't know.
All right, yeah, we don't need to get into it now, but I just wanted to bring it up because I've been forgetting and then find out kind of from which direction, manufacturing ordinance, cultivation ordinance, or both.
Probably that's most appropriate for the cultivation ordinance, since it'd be happening on the cultivation site.
All right. So our last meeting, we sort of left off narrowing things down to the discussion in the M zone. We talked about agricultural lands at our last meeting. Any public comment while we start off here? Anybody got any questions or comments before we get rolling?
Aaron Skrobeck. I do think it's important that we do include some type of outdoor, like is on the agenda for today, the 2,500 square foot outdoor, such as in the forest areas in the TVZ zones as well. I believe most of the roads that the Transportation Commission had spoken about, or whoever the lady was, mentioned, I think a lot of the roads are getting tore up more by some of the big trucks rather than just commercial, just regular drivers. An 60 to 80,000 pound 18-wheeler is going to do a lot more damage to a road rather than just a car would. So I do think it's important to include the 2,500 outdoor in some form. So please keep that in mind. Thanks.
Thank you. All right. Well, I think that The manufacturing zone discussion is probably a little bit more simple than agricultural discussion, I'm hoping. We were talking about setbacks, if they're appropriate in manufacturing zone, or if it might just be similar to what we've already defined in the manufacturing ordinance outline that Joel's working on. 5,000 square foot cultivation license type. That's a much bigger operation, but an inside manufacturing operation, you know, there's a lot of other manufacturing operations of other types in our community that are larger than that. That are more resource intensive or equally resource intensive. So possibly appropriate to include both, although starting with the smaller size, I think, you know, maybe easier to learn from, although I don't really know a lot about the specifics of the capitalization it takes to set up and operate a 5,000 square foot indoor, but it's large. So.
You know, I think if we just do 500 square feet, I think we started talking about that with the idea that maybe it would fit in more areas, and now we're kind of we kind of went the opposite end and restricted down the zoning side of it. You know, so I would think that 500 square feet in manufacturing, I think, would restrict a lot of investment in that size of scale of cultivation. So I want to keep it small. We also want to encourage operators to come into compliance, and, you know, for the ordinance to be useful, I'd like to see maybe like on the very small scale, you know, between permit fees, you know, maybe more ease of getting the license. And maybe you're gonna have to show you're gonna have to show some proof that your ventilation system's gonna work. Maybe we need a bigger setback for a 5,000 square foot operation. But I think we need to put something out there where someone's going to find it worthy to make an investment, because 500 square feet, you know, where it might fit where someone's already got an existing structure, and, you know, the investment's already made. It's part of their infrastructure existing already. I think those are the only people that really would be interested in pursuing, you know, a license that small, you know, with the investment it would take. So I'd like to see us, you know, allow it 500 to 5,000, maybe a bigger setback for 5,000, maybe stricter ventilation requirements, so that we see, you know, an ordinance that does, you know, attract a few participants, you know, to go sign a lease or make a purchase and make an investment.
Jesse, I have a question that you may know. On the indoor grows, are those the two permit sizes for the state? 500, then it goes up to 5,000, and then it goes up to another?
Right, 10,000.
Okay, and then on the outdoor is the minimum, the 2,500?
Correct.
Okay, what's the next tier on the outdoor?
5,000.
5,000. Thank you.
And then this sort of goes into something we haven't really talked about or we talked about it a little bit, license stacking, and if it's appropriate or not. It's a big problem on a state level, and there's lawsuits going on against CDFA about massive license stacking. But if we're talking about a 500 square foot license type and we're concerned about it limiting investment, it is frustrating to me that there isn't an in-between tier between 500 and 2,500, but allowing a stacking of a few 500s would create that in-between tier. If you were maybe allowed 2 or 3 of them in an appropriate building, then that would be a way to allow a more incremental expansion over time rather than going right to a 5,000 square foot license type. And the way the license pricing is tiered out, it's about the same. You know,
the way, I mean, the way the retail and manufacturing ordinances and the cultivation can be the same. You have your operation plan, you're kind of proposing to the county what you want to do. And so if you're coming in, you're proposing 3,000 square feet, and the county's like, okay, fine, get your state permits. And the way you get that is by stacking a bunch of 500s. I don't see that being a problem for the county. You know, or you can get a 5,000 and you're just paying excess of what you're able to do. But that's kind of between you and the state, I feel like.
Okay.
You know.
We just need some language to prevent like obvious, you know, abuse of exceeding what we're trying to intend, but that sounds like that would happen.
Well, you know,
when you
it's
propose
kind
your
of
plan.
it's kind of the same thing with you know, vertical integration in general. One of the requirements in the permit application is disclosure of all the permits you have. It doesn't necessarily mean anything specific is going to be done with that information, but everybody's going to know. And so if you're coming in and you're disclosing that you own 50 permits throughout the state, and you already have 5 here, the planning commission and the public and everybody can come out and make an argument and a decision about what that means for our community for that situation. We can maybe put in kind of a general policy finding that discourages too much stacking. But if we kind of leave it to the community to decide in each case, if we have one operator who's a great citizen, the community supports them, they're doing a great job, the community might be fine with them stacking, you know? So I think we can keep that pretty flexible and still have controls, because nobody's going to feel compelled at the planning commission or the board level to issue multiple permits for somebody. I don't worry about that.
All right. And then just, I guess, speculative investment in real estate, I suppose, is the other concern with larger operations, displacing, you know, existing businesses. You know, we don't want to be doing that. We don't want to displace, you know, affordable rent for a crab shed because somebody has a lot of money to, you know, buy them all up or something, you know. So that is a real problem. It has been a problem in other places in the past. It's becoming less of a problem because of the economy of cannabis, but I think it's still a concern. I think we're kind of going in the right direction though, not letting it be unlimited in scale. What do you guys think?
I got here a little late, but yeah, I mean, I don't see a problem with stacking smaller licenses. I mean, again, I like the example that Joel mentioned about the, you know, having the discretion within the planning commission and the board of supervisors and the public when that comes to, you know, permit time. And, you know, if there were, say, you know, somebody came in and they had 5, but they had 45 others in the state, you know, at least that we have a threshold there that we can kind of, you know, keep large-scale corporate stacking as much as we can out of the county, because that's happening a lot in other counties right now, in a lot of different places. So that's a big concern. But I mean, you know, at the 500 square foot scale, I don't know, you know, how worth it is for somebody to stack multiple licenses in multiple counties under that sizing. So
Sure.
it's not that big of a concern.
All right. Do we want to come up with a maximum square footage to start with that somebody can combine, you know, to alleviate
I would think if we
concerns?
allowed 500 square feet to be stackable and again, allow for a larger, I think a larger size.
Like
of
up
certain
to
criteria.
5,000, say,
I don't
and just
think there'd be any fear with the 500.
put that down as a number, up to 5,000, so you don't get, you know,
I think
some
that'd
weird
be fine.
situation where somebody all of a sudden is doing 20,000 square feet. You know.
And we're specifically talking about cultivation and manufacturing zones right now.
Well, it doesn't have to be limited to that. I think the stacking thing we didn't talk about enough when we were talking about the ag zones either. And I think Blake would probably lobby for limited amount of stacking. The whole point was to try it as an experiment to make sure it wasn't going to interfere with the existing character of our ag lands and those neighborhoods in those ag lands.
You know,
That's what I remember of it.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, to say a little something about that too, I think, you know, Kurt had mentioned a lot about some of the underdeveloped or, you know, kind of dilapidated buildings and whatnot on the, you know, ag lands. You know, allowing for a stackable potential in those spaces, you know, some of those 3,000 or 4,000 square foot barns, instead of just being a 500 square foot, could be bayed out. You know, obviously when you stack a 500 square foot license, each one of those has to be separate spaces. So there'd be a lot of infrastructure, requirements and capital requirements to retrofit some of those older existing buildings out, but it would give somebody the potential to want to invest that money into it if they were capable of, achieving a sizing that would be, at least, somewhat profitable for them.
Sure. Having 2 or 3 separate small spaces can work for production, especially if you're dealing with 2 or 3 different distinct varieties or something, then that may be the way you would set it up anyway, so that could work.
So when we're going at this whole stacking concept in a different direction, if we were going to be okay and put into this ordinance the ability to gain through the county up to a 5,000 square foot indoor license, what would, anybody's opinion, what would be additional restrictions that should be applied to that license versus the 500 square foot license? And or is there any additional restrictions, like for example setbacks or ventilations or whatnot? Because if there is additional restrictions in our mind for say a 4,900 square foot grow, and the ordinance for a 500 square foot grow doesn't have those, and we allow stacking, we're essentially allowing someone to grow 4,000 square foot without the restrictions that we would normally impose on a individually regulated 4,000 square foot grow. So we just need to think in our minds, if we're going to allow a 5,000 square foot indoor license, is there a different setback? Is there a different ventilation requirement? I mean, what do we think about that?
I wonder if we could tier up. I mean, let's say we take our 500 square foot requirements, and then each time they stack a license, it's multiplied by the size that they're, so if we require a certain CFM for, exhaust, a certain size filter, or, whatnot, each one of those could be multiplied up based off of, if you're only getting, say you're only stacking 2, you don't want to go to 4, you only want to do 1,000. Because you think that might be profitable for you. I mean, I think there's some mechanisms in there we could probably implement with just mathematical calculations that just each time tier up. So your requirements would change.
That could probably work in the M zone, but I think that may not apply as easily in the ag zone because there's other, like commercial intensity and impact is more of an issue in the ag zone. I think that's why those were the concerns we talked about. That was more the meat of the discussion and why we kind of stopped at the 500. So I don't know, I'm not really fully comfortable with allowing, 9 or 10 of these license types in an ag zone when the whole parameter of the discussion was around 1. It's really a different conversation.
Yeah, would they, each one of them, when they get another one to stack, would that have to go through planning and they'd have a chance at planning?
If it came at a later time, then it would, yeah.
It could all come at once, or it could come in and then staggered, and then it would be each a time, or it would be a choice at that time or at each additional time what to do. So that's why if we wanted to allow stacking, we could be saying up to a certain amount of square footage per parcel per applicant type stuff. And if it went all the way up to 5,000 square foot, then the whole point being, why not just allow a 5,000 square foot license? Financially, yes, if you only were going to allow 2,000 square foot, then it would be the permit, the guy who wants the permit, person who wants the permit, probably financially makes sense to go and grab 4 500 square foot license as opposed to getting the larger license, at least through the state side. I don't know. We haven't talked yet about what appropriate county fees may be involved in the whole situation.
We'll be stopping at 2,500 in any case, for stacking. But what about like a time frame? Like if we just started with 1 license only for the first 6 months or a year, does that make any sense? We don't even address multiples in the first.
I think it's easier to just do it unofficially. And when you submit your operation plan, we start by only recommending the planning commission the simple operation.
Okay.
If they work, we maybe get more liberal. I don't know if that needs to be codified. It doesn't seem like it does.
All right.
Question, maybe Jesse, you're better at answering this. When we're measuring, because what we're measuring with the square footage is canopy, is there a specific definition in the state regulations as to how canopy is measured? For example, a lot of indoor grows, and keeps talking about stacking, stack. They have 2 or 3 tiers in the same square footage. The
Vertically,
cubic footage is
Yeah, they have specific, pretty
multiplied.
good definitions now. So in those situations, you have to multiply the 2-dimensional square footage, you know, for each level that you go
plant,
up.
essentially each plant, even though it's maybe three tall.
Yeah, well, it's, I don't know if it's defined so much by the plant, but
Yeah.
levels of illumination. It would be like, you know, a bank of illumination and then a second bank of illumination. It may not even involve, you could just have one really tall plant, I suppose. There do different creative ways, but it's more about, they do address that, and then they talk about the space between being included, and then how to exclude that. What is the definition of the barriers, garden beds, walls, hoop house, you know, whatever. There's a list of things that qualify as a separation barrier, so that if you have space between your zones, you don't pay on all the space between. But if you have a cultivation area that you say is 500 square feet, then it's just the whole area within that, unless you defined it as separate areas. Like I have one 250-foot area and then a separate 250-foot area, and then cumulatively they're 500. You can do that as long as you meet the definitions and the requirements for the separation of space.
We already have a definition of cultivation area that we're pretty much bound to because we stuck in the tax ordinance. But I can't remember what it is.
I thought it was just whatever the state license type is. That's what we were, during the discussion, it was,
Did we?
Because we couldn't necessarily figure out how to define it.
like if you have a 5,000-foot license, you pay $5,000. If you have a 2,500-foot license and it doesn't, the county wasn't gonna care about what you're actually using.
Pretty sure, but yeah.
I'll have to double check that. I don't remember. A long time ago.
Would everybody be okay with just saying we allow up to 5,000 square feet, whether you achieve it through stacking or not, and just have a second set of recommendations for the planning commission for the 5,000 square foot scale?
I'd say yeah, but not on ag lands. Maybe on manufacturing zones, but not in
I'd be
ag.
okay with that. I mean, yeah, I don't see a problem with, you know, I mean, if we're going to allow up to 5,000 square foot, we shouldn't just say you should only do it with stacking. I mean, I think we should, if we're considering going up to 5,000 square foot, then we should consider allowing for a 5,000 square foot straight state.
Oh, right, yeah. I would rather see
I
it,
would be okay with that.
I'd rather see it stop somewhere in the middle, you know, like, so that we're sort of
Yeah.
creating a middle ground at 2,500 feet. But again, I don't think in ag lands, I think we need to re-agendize that discussion in terms of stacking in ag lands
Yeah, I
and
think
talk about it.
Blake would
when
have a
Blake's
lot
here,
he'd
because
want to
that's,
say for that, I'm sure. So.
it is different. I mean, I think you can, I don't know, 5,000 feet in an M zone seems more appropriate to me than 5,000 feet in an ag zone, at least until you're figuring out what the issues are and what they aren't, you know, I don't know.
Well, I think it's,
I don't know enough about
it's
it.
totally a setback derived function, because for someone to say that 5,000 square foot in an M zone is okay versus an ag zone, there's a lot of, you know, residential properties impacted by M zones, and in ag zones with appropriate, there's a lot of residential properties impacted by ag zones, but with setbacks, there's far more ag properties that are not coming anywhere close to impacting residential zones and would be more appropriate for a 5,000 square foot grow just by using a setback requirement. You know, so if you're not talking about any setback requirement on M zones, you put maybe some certain setback requirements on ag zones, then you'd be pushing that into an ag zone that would be more appropriate for the community around it than even in an M zone.
I see what you're saying. I could see how they could be equal. I could see how an M zone site could be equally appropriate to a certain ag site, because M zones are designed for lots of commercial traffic, big truck traffic. That's the planning intention of an M zone, constant, possibly even 24 hours a day manufacturing, multiple shifts. That's what it's made for. And I think there are also certain ag zones that are designed exactly for that too. Very intense agricultural operations that may not even be appropriate, I guess, in an M zone. So to what you're saying, I suppose there could be ag places that are more appropriate than certain M places, just because they're so far away.
Yeah, I think it's just a setback. A setback would help define.
Yeah.
Would pretty much encompass those appropriate places in those
Sure.
zonings by just using the setbacks, which would eliminate
Right.
properties like we've talked over and over about this church tree situation with that ag, 5-acre ag with a certain setback that would, exclude or severely limit the use of that property, and it would eliminate the concern of that community for that zone just by a setback. Obviously if that was an M zone, it would be a different
Sure.
scenario, but, it helps in that. Otherwise, there's a lot of properties out there that are so far away from anything, and then we're saying they're not appropriate even though they're miles from anything.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, my personal opinion with the, allowing 5,000 square foot grow in an ag land is we should. I don't see why. I think we may be overstating the impacts of traffic on the ag zones. I do know that, I mean, obviously it's a business and they're going to have traffic, they're going to have trucks, but I personally don't believe that it's as big of an impact as some of the other things that occur on an ag land. A lot of the ag, businesses and professions are year-round. They may be seasonal, but they just move into a different set of things that they do. And so the constant impact, I think we're just overstating it. And I think that, it's completely appropriate to allow for, 5,000 square foot grow in an ag land, as long as we have setbacks that pertain to that sizing, because there's a lot of property out there that could be developed. I'm sure there's a lot of people in the community that don't want to see a lot of that property developed to cannabis, but they have opportunities to get in and do something else with that property too if it's for sale. So I don't see a problem with it.
Yeah, I agree from the perspective of people who have experience with cannabis. I think that's true. I think that here there's just a kind of a general lack of experience with the industry, the business, and its potential impacts. So that's kind of true all over the world. It's such a new thing. And so I think that's all. It's a political thing, it's like it frightens people, the idea of it, So I'm just trying to be sensitive to that and the reality of it, that's all.
Yeah, no, and I think we all are too. And, I mean, I do wish that more of the public with the opposite opinions would come to a meeting and express some of their concerns. I constantly look out here and I see the same people week after week, and they're expressing the same views that I have. And so it's hard to put a lot of weight into the opinions that aren't necessarily public, that are made in private to people. And so I, given the fact that I'm sitting here with a microphone in front of me, feel as though a 5,000 square foot grow is appropriate for an ag zone given proper setbacks. I mean, if we're going to talk about getting up to that point, we might as well allow for it in the most, the best place for it to go. There's not a lot of manufacturing zones, and my concern, I think, derives from the fact that if we push our larger grows into manufacturing zones, there's not a lot of manufacturing zones or buildings available or capable of housing that. And so we have to see what that capability is for the ag zones. And I mean, I wish Blake were here because this is obviously a really good discussion for him to be here about.
He won't be here next week either.
Yeah, and I'm sure we're not going to tie up anything here.
Sure. Well, I'd like to move this to our next week agenda since we don't have the ag zone detail on our agenda today. Let's revisit that with the consideration of the stacking and the setbacks in regards to that.
I guess I'm misremembering, but didn't we land last meeting at 5,000 for the 20 and over acres?
That's where I thought we had.
Okay, yeah, I
with
forgot.
100-foot
Help me out
setback
here.
from residential property lines and the
We said no.
lesser setback for just other ag
Yeah,
property
some of my
lines.
notes here say 100 to 200 foot property line setbacks, up to 5,000 square foot on a 20, ag 20s. And no light leak, no odors, you know, things of that nature. I don't know if we tied it all up, but we certainly got to that point where that's what we were discussing.
Yeah, so.
All right,
so,
never mind.
Not kind of, I had recalled too, that we kind of determined that certain larger setback, so back to license stacking. If we're okay with putting together at least the individual areas where we are okay with up to a 5,000 square foot license type, then in my opinion, we should have something in our ordinance that limits the ability to stack past 5,000 for any license type, because we don't want a 50,000 square foot grow by stacking multiple 5,000 square foot license, and we don't want to go, and if someone's going to decide to stack 500s, then they really shouldn't go past where we're maximizing it. And that's where I get back to, I'm a little concerned about how that all works when you stack multiple 500s, and does that get us around any of the way we're writing an ordinance for buffers and setbacks? You know, if someone has a 4,000 square foot grow they want, but it doesn't meet the 5,000 square foot setback, well, they stack a bunch of 500 square foot licenses and get around that setback. And so that would be the only thing. I know we talked a little bit about maybe needing less ventilation requirements for 500 as far as requirements, hard lines, versus maybe a larger situation. The setback alleviates a lot of that. So that's the only thing I think about. We should think about is stacking, if there's anything that it's getting around on our ordinance.
Good idea.
There is a 2,500 square foot indoor grow, right?
No.
No, it just goes from 5 to 5,000.
Yeah.
Yeah. I haven't studied much about the indoor.
But it's the cost of the license is like, what do you say? It's amortized the same way, you know, the cost per foot that you pay.
Could we to kind of fudge around a little bit? I mean, could we say, okay, you can stack up to 2,500 square foot, so you can stack 500 square foots, and then hey, if you wanted to go to 5,000, you've got to have the building that's capable of doing a 5,000.
That's what I was thinking, because if you're going over halfway, then you might as well.
You know, it gives an entry level for everyone in there.
Sure.
It caps it off at a large scale at 5,000. It doesn't allow for stacking anything over 2,500 square foot. So if you wanted to get to 5,000, you would pull a 5,000 square foot permit.
Sure.
You know, if you wanted to say, if you wanted to start small, your first year you get a 500 square foot. You know, if that goes well for you and you've made your money back and you've got investment capital prepared to go back in, maybe you could double that or go up to 2,500 square foot and stack that way. Which, you know, and then that leads you into making some more money, you're profitable, you're doing a good business, and then, you know, 2 years later you go to the 5,000 square foot. You're just incrementally, you know, growing if your business is growing with you.
The ability to stack licenses is clearly a beneficial business model for any business that wants to get
small scale
this,
too. I mean,
you know.
especially if we're in a county that's poverty level. So, you know, if we're trying to you know, reach people that want an entry level into cannabis, then here you go. You get a 500 square foot, make it work. You know, next season you get, you know, or your following harvest in indoor, you're multiple harvests in a year. Your permit's for 1 year, so you're stuck in that parameter for a full season or a full year. But I mean, I think that is actually kind of a unique little, you know, unique little idea.
Excellent. I like it.
So I guess we would just have to figure out all the little small details of what can be the hitches in there that might impede the giddy up.
Yeah, the details, maybe different setbacks as you stack more licenses possibly. I don't know if when you go back to that conversation in the ag zone. In the M zone, I don't think it matters.
No, I don't think so either.
Yeah. What other details in the M zone? What are we forgetting in the M zone? It seems pretty well set up for it. It's like kind of the place. So I can't really think of too many.
without having a
that are different.
clear and present map in front of me to look at all the M zones. I mean,
Oh,
they're
locations,
scattered out.
sure.
The M zones are scattered out in all kinds of random places, like,
There's some weird M zones that are kind of like somewhat near neighborhoods, I guess. Like
there's a lot of M zones that border right up to residential houses.
there's some more M zone stuff for sale recently. I've noticed that place up at the end of Rowdy Creek Road over by the hatchery that's owned by Green Diamond, big old piece of M zone there. It's for sale all of a sudden. A few
Well,
weeks
the
ago.
other side of the highway of that M
Right.
zone borders residential
Right,
properties
right. So there are those.
on almost all sides.
Is that a problem, Joel? Is that going to be?
It's not a problem for me.
He doesn't live next to an M zone.
How about planning?
I mean, they live next to an M zone. They live there. Basic principles of land use. You know, you live next to a zone, you live next to people that do what they can do on that zone. If you want to do a setback, let's do a setback.
I don't have a large issue. I don't have a large issue with having, either no or very minimal setback on an M zone.
I think just
Not
as,
any setback,
as we've talked about before, the not being able to create a nuisance, not producing evidence of your operation outside your building, those kinds of things seem
Well, I think
manageable.
the biggest thing is the filtration.
The
Yes.
odors are going to be the
The
biggest.
odor, yeah, because
Nuisance
we hear the
complaint.
most from public and stuff, so.
Not smelling.
If we have it on an M zone.
Per the
or an
opinion of the code
agricultural
officer.
zone, I mean, we have to
Right.
consider filtration, and
Oh,
you were
yeah.
saying they have different calibers of,
Sure.
charcoal or.
Sized correctly for the proposed project. Yeah. Okay.
there's a ton of business operations that could move into an M zone and adversely impact your residents if you were living next to them that essentially the county has minimal control over. And this is something that the county and the state has a large control over as far as mitigating problems and requiring businesses operate appropriately versus any of these other businesses that could move into those zones.
true.
So there's a lot of built-in requirements that are going to actually be beneficial versus a different business taking over in that area.
Yeah, in a long-term down economy, it's sort of nice living in an industrial zone. But then when the economy picks up, it's not so nice living in an industrial zone anymore, I guess. It's sort of been the condition in Del Norte. There's been a lot of nice industrial zones. It's been really quiet neighborhoods. They've kind of turned into that through use permits for manufacturing homes and things like manufactured homes, stuff like that.
I mean, I think unfortunately the county's going to have to deal with nuisance calls as staff. It's probably just something they're going to have to shoulder with it. I mean, if manufacturing zone, butted next to a residential zone, you're probably going to get some phone calls at some point. But I don't know. I guess you would get phone calls if they were pumping gas at 3 in the morning and it was wafting into your bedroom.
All right, we'll leave that to the planning commission then. If there's nothing else on number 1, we go to number 2.
No, nothing else on number 1. I just had a question before we moved into number 2. I don't know if this should be prioritized on a different meeting or how this is coming up with this, but have we discussed at all how are we coming up with the fee structure for the county? Like as far as permit fees and all those things? Is that something we're going to discuss, or is that something the county is taking on?
What Heidi and I talked about was using the regular use permit fee to begin with, and then just cost studies to see if we're covering our costs, which we probably won't be, and then, the board will have to adopt a fee schedule with the use permit fee based on data. And so we can't really accumulate that data very well based on predictions. We can estimate, but we won't do a very good job, and we don't have that much time. So we discussed just using the regular use permit fees and adjusting in time.
Are you allowed to add a percentage to the existing use permit fee for this project without showing any real data? Is that
No.
an issue? Not allowed to, or?
The board has to adopt
Okay.
any fee.
All right.
And the board has to publish the data supporting the fee before the hearing. And we can use estimated data. We just have to have something. And I mean, I don't know what we do it based on.
Other counties, Humboldt's app fee is like $6,600. That's like 5 times the use permit.
Yeah, but I mean, you'd have to show how providing that service is costing us
Okay.
directly.
But you
And
can't make
so
money.
Right.
We can't survey other counties and say this is the industry standard. We have
Okay.
to say it's costing us this much, or we predict it will.
Okay.
Give the public an opportunity to say, no, that's crazy, or whatever.
Well, it makes perfect sense, given the fact that each county's particularly different, you know, so each county is it's gonna cost each county a little bit differently, and they just can't show a profit.
All right.
I'm not sure what all the, real quickly, because we could talk about this at another meeting, maybe that's agendized, but I'm not sure what the normal use permits are used for, and the, I guess, inspection process that the county's almost required to go through on a timeline basis with that use permit. But I would think that the county would have the ability to just pretty easily show that it's going to cost us X amount more than a normal use permit, because we're going to be required to be inspecting on, let's say, a monthly basis of this permit. And so right there you have this inspection that happens, you know, multiple hours every month of an individual's time to go out and inspect. You know?
Could the county, say, charge like a, you know, so say if the inspectors, you know, X amount an hour to the county, could they just charge that to the permittee, the person or the entity that's pulling the permit, and say, okay, it took us 3 hours from the county's perspective to implement your process, your permit, and go out and inspect? I mean, could we just baseline charge them out at that fee? Cost us $350.
If we have like a fee schedule that's adopted by the board that says, you know, inspection will cost X number of dollars per hour, then yeah, we can. We do have inspection fees for building permits and things. Code enforcement has an hourly rate. We just have to adopt it.
Because I'd hate to see the county lose money.
Yeah,
You know, I mean,
the county's going to lose money.
Totally.
It's just the nature of the thing. Hopefully, the industry produces enough tax revenue to make it back. Yeah, right? That's the logic of it.
Only thing I would be, concerned about if the county set up a structure like that, where it was like, we're going to charge you for whatever we do on your property, right?
Yeah.
So the permit holder would be like, well, why the heck are you sitting here looking at this for 2 hours? Like, this is just like the guy down the street, and you spent 10 minutes on him and 2 hours on me, so I'm going to take you to court, county, or I'm going to petition that charge, and that could tie up a lot of time.
Right.
Petitioning the charges when the permit holder feels like it's unnecessary or uneven treatment. So,
Yolo County was pretty bold. Did you see their estimates?
Yeah.
They were like saying it cost them $30-something thousand to do your permit.
Well, you know,
It was like-
they do it in restaurants all the time now. They have the surprise inspection for the health guy to come in, and he charges. So, I mean, there's got to be something that you can implement on here for an annual or a biannual inspection and a charge, just to cover your cost, or a little bit. It may not be anything close, but
Yeah, and I guess we'll just have to get through it and
Just
try
have to wait
figure
till-
out, once the staff gets the data together, about this is the average time it takes us to process a, you know, 5,000 square foot permit. So this is what we're going to charge.
Okay.
definitely want to.
We just may have to get into it.
Back to all these cost structures at some point.
and is that something
Okay.
this board needs to try to do, or does the Board of Supervisors do that?
The Board of Supervisors will have to actually adopt the fee ultimately.
But calculating it or getting the data would be just experience, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's gonna be
discussion.
that's gonna be a thing that staff is gonna be able to do with time studies, and,
Okay.
you know, they can figure out what it costs them.
Okay,
As far as inspection, like how often it's gonna happen, things like that,
right.
I don't know.
Okay, well, we could, on
talk
either
about
the
that
next
later.
one or another meeting, we could agendize some discussion of fee schedule strategy. Is that appropriate, or is this, okay? All right, item 2, outdoor cultivation. That's
Well,
what I'd
like-
like to talk about.
Like the gentleman that came up to the podium and said, I also think that we need to adopt an outdoor as well as an indoor recommendation for the Board of Supervisors. at this time and level
Sure.
before just assuming they're going to let us to go ahead and recommend other things later. I think that it's adamant that we should say we need an outdoor and an indoor.
I think we're making good time, and I think we probably can include both of those in a single draft ordinance. All right, 2,500 square foot outdoor. So we start that discussion on the ag land, since we kind of already have a little basis for that. And then let me just mention, I had a little time to read through the new regulations from the state, and the state does have regulations on light leakage dawn to dusk. It's already not allowed. You have to shield it from nighttime glare. I didn't see any more advanced definition of really what that meant exactly, but it is mentioned in there. So that's, it's different. You're not going to be filtering any odors. You're not going to be necessarily able to hide it visually. Light, you can, during the nighttime, you can take measures to eliminate leakage of light, but smell and seeing it.
I think those are good reasons to limit it to timberland. I don't think people want to see it. I don't think people want to see big fences around it either. And I don't think people want to smell it.
Well, in that premise of conversation is, in my opinion, short-sighted on what actually outdoor cultivation is. Because not necessarily seen. I mean, it could be seen, but not necessarily. Technically, outdoor cultivation could be happening in these very exact same structures that we're permitting indoor cultivation in. It's just a function of usage of supplemental light. So, in a greenhouse is outdoor cultivation. Plain and simple, as far as the state defines it. And in many scenarios, you would be visually unseen in that greenhouse. And there can be scenarios where it is seen during at least some time or all the time of the cultivation in that greenhouse. Where it's seen from is a whole different ball game. It could be outdoor cultivation miles from any road in a situation that is ag zone. And so that's a problem. I don't think
Makes
so.
sense with setbacks, but that goes to our earlier conversation about structureless versus structure cultivation and not being so specific to your state license. If we should probably redefine this item number 2 if we're specifically talking about the freedom to cultivate without a structure as defined by the county versus cultivating within a structure. That may be two totally different things. That would be under the indoor.
That's where I'm thinking we are,
Right.
We, I think, just moved on from the in a structure issue,
Right.
and now we're in the out of a structure issue.
Mhm.
Forget about the terms indoor and outdoor if they're not helpful.
Right.
No, I agree
So
with that.
out of a structure. So if ag 20s, like we're talking about, that are, fine for larger indoors, maybe the setbacks are appropriate. Maybe these places are appropriate for even far more awful operations. Why wouldn't they be appropriate for a 2,500 square foot structureless grow? That's possible. I think there are possibly ag lands that could be appropriate, although it's less politically.
So we're talking about outdoor commercial cultivation, and we're gonna define it one way as to being in a structure and another way as to being out of structure, and write two different kind of regulations towards
No,
that?
not that, I don't think that's what I understood. I mean, if you're going to grow outdoor, now, if we just say indoor, if you do it in a greenhouse with an indoor that's supplemental, light leakage is the issue. Outdoor without lights, you could have it in a greenhouse. I mean, if I ever get a permit for my property, I will put it in a greenhouse. It's just more for pollen and dust. And controllability of the environment versus, any other reason.
So we're going to say no light usage then under this qualification? Because there's the state kind of messed up on the mixed light
They did.
definition. There's a mixed light category that uses no artificial light. which is a shame.
Mhm.
It's if you're using a tarp to block out
The deck,
light,
yeah.
then you're in the mixed light category from the state.
But if we're talking full term, just in a greenhouse, just for environmental, that isn't
Sure.
defined as the state any other way other than just outdoor growing.
Right, outdoor is without lights and without tarps.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah. So if
Under
I
the
had,
license
if
category,
I had
yeah.
my greenhouse built,
Mm-hmm.
I plant in my greenhouse, all I'm doing is protecting it from the rain,
Right.
the environment, dust, pollen, maybe I have a filter in there filtering air, fresh air in, fresh air out, those kinds of things. Those aren't defined as the state is.
Where does the mixed light license land?
Well, that's a-
then?
that's a
It's either in a
whole-
structure or it's not, I think, is
Yeah.
where it lands
Right.
as far as counties. What do you think, Joel?
I don't think we need to deal with any of that. We have an ordinance that allows in a permanent structure and an ordinance that allows it outside of a permanent structure. And then whatever your operation plan that you submit to the county approves, go to the state and get whatever permit the state says you need for that. I don't care if they call it mixed light or indoor or outdoor.
It's just
Right.
however your grow
Sounds good.
operations would be. This
Okay.
is just how I grow, or this is how
So the
you
discussion
grow.
then, I guess, of structureless growing, are we going to say no lights? Is that kind of what you're getting
We
at?
should just say not a permanent structure or we need to work on this. The state uses permanent structure. I like maybe define it a little more closely, a structure that is permitted or something like
Right.
that. But if you're outdoor and you're just using, beds and, tarps and whatever, but you're not in a permanent structure, call that outdoor.
Sure.
So maybe that's mixed light by the state's definition, but it would just be structureless
Right.
for ours.
So specifically the question of using lights, though, are we saying that for now to start or whatever?
If you're outdoor and you're using lights, if you're not in a permanent structure and you're using lights,
Well, you wouldn't. I mean,
That is used all the time.
Yeah, that's like,
Without a
that's
structure.
used.
Yeah, day length
Well,
extension
yeah.
lights are really typical. That's like a
Very
typical.
typical.
yeah,
light
but if
on
you
an
can't have,
outdoor
if you can't
grow.
have light leakage, how can you extend the day with a light?
Yeah,
Without,
I mean, every
Yeah,
grow I've ever
Without
seen,
a
it's-
permanent structure,
without a permanent structure.
like a piece of plastic.
Yeah, you can't hang lights on a small little hoop house.
Sure you can.
Yeah, but it's not legal. I mean, it
It's
doesn't follow
also,
any
it's also
electrical county
ugly.
code.
It's also not, right? If you're in a structure, you're in a structure. That
Okay, so
structure
that's
is
what I'm
gonna
saying. Are we
be,
gonna say no lights or not?
I don't think you need to even comment on it.
Oh, really?
Because if they
Because-
just pull a mixed light permit, then they still have to go to the county for their required permit for electrical, running into a structure. If they're, say if, if I wanted to grow in a greenhouse that was mixed light, I would have to pull the mixed light permit from the state, get my county permit, but the county would still have to come out and inspect the building, the greenhouse, make sure it's got a permit, make sure the electrical conduits are run properly. I mean, all of those parameters still would have to be met for a mixed light permit.
You can totally use lights and not be within the dawn dusk things, because there's situations where it just gets a little too shady at your site
Totally.
and it's not sunset yet. You're still allowed to use lights, but the sun's not giving you enough intensity to keep the photo period triggered on the plant. So you might use some lights and turn them off before you have to.
Right.
And so now you're using lights and you have no structure. What if I go out there with a flashlight and shine a flashlight on my plants?
Well, but that's
now
not
what?
necessarily a county code issue. You're holding a flashlight. We're talking about if you've
That's what
got,
I mean.
say-
So if we say, are we going to no lights, that means I can't use a flashlight.
I don't think that it matters, right? If you're out of a structure and you submit an operation plan that says you're going to use lights, the operation plan will be assessed if you're not going to use them at night. If you've got electricity, if you've got everything fine, if it's not going to cause visual blight.
Okay.
I don't know that we need to care so much
All right,
with the
perfect.
ordinance.
Excellent.
I don't think so
I like
either.
that idea. It's
Yeah.
simpler.
No, seriously,
All right,
yeah.
cheers. Perfect.
So then we get back to, like Joel made the comment about visually, I don't like it, it wants to be in TPZ zones because of maybe fencing or other issues. So, you have in a greenhouse where you don't see it and it's an outdoor permit.
That'd be a structure, though, I guess.
how would that not be appropriate for an outdoor commercial cultivation license?
It'd be an outdoor license from the state maybe, but it would be a structure permit from us.
Right.
Structure permit. That's the first I've heard of a structure permit. What's the structure permit?
That's what
from
we're
us?
calling it.
I just made the term up, but that's what we've been talking about is
you're
it
an
going to be in
indoor
a
permit.
structure? That's what the state calls it, but the state, you know, obviously the state definition is inadequate because it's about light usage and not about the building, right? We have things that happen in a structure and things that happen out of a structure. We just went through and talked about manufacturing ag land within an existing structure in the coastal zone, still within a structure of some sort outside the coastal zone, and we never discussed in a structure on TPZ or anything. But when we get to the outdoor conversation, I don't really care what the state calls it. We're just looking at, is it outside of that structure that we were talking about before?
Sure.
So, I mean, I guess the thing I would think of, you know, if we're looking at it defining as in a structure or out of structure is the confinement of, you know, I mean, if we're considering allowing for a little bit larger grows for the outdoor spaces, I don't know if we are or not. You know, in the structure, are we then considering it to be locked in with the sizing that we have talked about with indoor?
Are you talking about in a structure?
Yeah, in a structure.
In a structure,
In a structure.
outdoor, or, I'm not sure.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, okay, personally, when I get my permit, if I get a permit, if we were ever allowed to get a permit, I'll build my greenhouse, get a permit for the greenhouse, and I will run my plants in the greenhouse full term.
So you'll have to
May or
follow
may not
the
use
rules.
lights, that's still dependent upon how I want to run if I want to get a mixed light permit.
Sure.
But say for the
Right.
pure simplicity of talk, if I'm just going full term, no light usage, I will still do it inside of a greenhouse.
We have different structure requirements, I would think, for ag land to manufacturing land to timberland. If you're cultivating in a structure, you might have different requirements. You might need more strict requirements to make sure the aesthetic appeal is there in ag land, whereas in timberland, where it's impossible to view it other than from the air, then maybe those aesthetic considerations are not so important. It's more about safety or whatever other concerns the county would have, permitted structures.
Yeah, I guess I just got a little confused as to what we were talking about because, I mean, a
Yeah.
greenhouse is a structure
Right.
as defined by the county.
Let's just stick with out of a structure, so like things that don't require permits, you know, I don't even know what that would be, because
So,
anything that
yeah.
supports a roof requires a permit.
The one thing I would be wondering about, because it seems to, for me, it's coming a little bit the wrong direction of trying to figure this out, but rolling back, and we don't have it in front of us, we just talked earlier about, we weren't really sure what it said, is the county tax code thing that we wrote, like, how is that written? Because does it say that indoor permits through the county are required to be taxed at a certain rate, and then now we're talking if someone's going to use a greenhouse, they're going to have to pull an indoor permit
That's
from the
I
county?
guess that's what I was trying
And
to
that's
ask.
kind of
is-
ridiculously crazy, right?
No, it's the state, it's based on the state permit, I believe.
Yeah, I don't know how the county wrote that code. I can't remember.
I
don't
can't
have it in
remember how
front
we
of me.
wrote that code.
Because that, right there, kind of would put the,
All right, well, we'll have,
roll back to why we're talking about it this way.
we'll have that whipped out for our next meeting, and we'll go over that to see if there's any conflicts there that are,
It was based on what the state does, and we didn't mention mixed light. So either we're not taxing that, and if we're not taxing it, then we're not allowing it.
right.
I want that permit then.
Or we'll just bump you up to the higher tax, whatever it is. I don't know, I don't remember.
I just don't know if it said your state permit, based upon your state permit, or based upon your county permit. Because that completely affects my argument into this conversation. Because why would you say somebody can't use a greenhouse? If you're gonna, if they put a piece of plastic over their plants, we're gonna triple their charge, and it's kind of crazy.
No, it's about your light intensity and about your state permit. So you're gonna get taxed by the county at the $3 if your state permit is indoor, allowing you for the, you know, more than 25 watts per square foot.
Sure. But Joel's talking about structure, so, you know, he's talking about your county permit being based on a structure versus your light usage.
Yeah, but that doesn't have anything to do with the tax, though. That's all I'm saying. The
I don't know
tax-
if it does or doesn't.
Well,
That's why I was wondering how it's written,
Right.
because if it's written to what your county permit says, And if you use a greenhouse and the county permit requires,
Sure.
since that's a structure, you get an indoor permit, you're taxed at the 3 times rate.
Let's check that after Joel has a
Yeah,
chance to look over
that's the
it.
only thing that would make the difference in what I'm arguing, what my point
Yeah,
is.
no, I get you.
You know, if just the fact, which seems kind of crazy, I go pull an indoor permit because I want to have a greenhouse over my
Greenhouse,
plants.
yeah. With
And
no
it doesn't
light.
cost me anything different, well, then I guess it's not a big deal, but it's just, it seems ridiculous and that to have to do that. Because I'm on, let's say, an ag land or an M land or something like that.
Well, hopefully there's a good, sensible solution to
Yes.
that.
Yeah.
Is this anything you have to worry about stacking, like you said? What's the next permit size after 5,000?
10,000.
10,000?
Yeah, I think in all scenarios, we should think about stacking, you know, because
Right.
at no point are we exactly saying we should have a 100,000 square foot grow
Right.
outdoor. at
If
least
it's fine with the
initially.
tax thing, though, I mean, you can, stacking doesn't get around the taxes, if that's what you're asking.
Yeah, I know, it doesn't.
No, but like we said in
Oh,
the
right,
square footage
sure.
on the indoor,
Sure.
to
Yeah.
stop it at 2,500 if.
I would like to
goes
see
5,000.
that as a starting point, or if it was larger than that as a starting point, maybe 2 of them, or 2 of different license categories. Like, I might be inclined to have a 2,500 square foot mixed light, I mean, I don't, if that's even allowed, or and a 2,500 square foot outdoor, something like that. But something in that range, I would be fine if we just stopped at one 2,500 square foot structureless growing operation.
Or 5,000 square foot structured outdoor.
Sure, but I think I'd like to keep that as a separate conversation entirely, because it is, we didn't get into structure, we talked a lot about cultivation and structures, but we didn't talk about timberland. So we didn't cross the zoning over with structure cultivation really so much, and so that is different in timberland. The reason why we skipped, we put off the timberland discussion because it seemed like it was going to consume, or it will consume more time with environmental considerations, possibly, and tribe influence considerations that may take longer to figure out than in a structure, I guess, but I'm not sure why that would be.
Just
Anyway.
to weigh in on that real quick, Jesse, I think we've centered a lot of conversations around wanting tribal input, and just so everybody is aware that probably within the next 1 to 2 meetings, you'll probably get some pretty significant weighing in from the Tallawah-Dene Nation on that.
Excellent.
Possibly next meeting, but it might be too close of a window
Sure.
from,
Yeah, I heard, I look
Representation.
forward to that.
I am the vice chair on the Natural Resources and Harvest Committee, I think is our new title that we gave ourselves, but, you know, so there is some conversations with that. You know,
Sure.
there's a lot of like this and this with the state and tribal governments trying to come to a conclusion on how the tribes can interact with this new law,
Right.
because it is an infringement upon sovereignty what is being done to the tribes on this. So the tribes come out at it from that direction, because previously the federal government allows tribes to conduct themselves as an independent entity as long as they're in as long as they're abiding by local and state laws or ordinances, which to this point haven't required any interaction directly between the tribe and the state. But now, in order for tribes to be compliant with that, they're required to basically get the state's permission and pay the state fees to be in compliance, which is, from the tribal perspective, an infringement upon tribal sovereignty, which there's a large discussion going on that front, which is where they're, in order to get tribal input, a lot of times there's a lot of legal jurisdiction that needs to be talked about before any opinions can be given.
So are you saying, is the Tallawah Nation interested in pursuing cannabis?
The Tallawah-Dene Nation
Dene
is,
Nation, sorry.
I wouldn't suspect to be precisely interested in pursuing that necessarily, but to give their opinion puts, you know, public perception out there. So
Okay.
there's a lot of discussion that needs to happen and specifically with groups of people within the tribe, and those things are happening based upon trying to get their information from them, trying to reach out to them. There's been specific communications, reaching out, trying to get their information, and it's coming soon. So just so everybody knows, there will be some more opinions on that. Good. Directly. That's what we need. By the end of the month, I would say, since it's the beginning of the month now.
So structureless cultivation, county council thinks it's more sellable to be in timberland locations out of sight. Some of us think that there are possibly suitable agricultural zoned lands that could support that. Let's talk about that. Where does it fit? What would that look like? What kind of ag lands would be suitable for an open air cultivation site? There's not a lot of ag lands that are suitable for open air cultivation sites, for flower production anyway. But there are some. There's a little bit of ag land inland. Not a lot, but it exists. But wouldn't want to prevent somebody to giving a go at it just because it hasn't historically been the best place to do it. So I don't know. What do you think? Big giant setbacks, big old parcels, 40-acre parcels, 2,000 feet setback.
If we're talking about
20-acre parcels.
Growing, commercial outdoor growing with absolutely no structure, period, no essentially greenhouse or anything that's used around it, and absolutely no visual impairment required, meaning like a fence or anything like that. I think there should be setbacks on all properties, regardless of where they're at, whether they need certain larger or smaller setbacks is maybe a different conversation. But yeah, I agree that in ag lands, specifically coastal ag lands, not necessarily coastal commission influenced ag lands, because there's really no environmental difference between coastal commission and non-coastal commission ag lands in the coastal area, mountain range towards the ocean. There's probably, as far as you're saying, flower production, that's probably not something that's going to be extensively done. It might be trialed and aired, but I mean, there's other derivatives from these plants that could be possibly garnered than just straight flower production. I mean, they could be using the plants to press oil or something like that that could eventually become usable.
Sure. We should have put the nursery license type on here too, I suppose, if we're talking about ag lands. That's probably the more realistic, appropriate. You're not bound to size with that, with the license type.
Again, that's also something that would more than likely be done in a greenhouse or structure. Sure. And so, so that rolls back to there's a multitude of uses for a state-defined outdoor license in ag lands. Structureless county definition of that, much less so, but possibly still some.
Well, just because the county is not requiring a specific structure doesn't mean that you can't use one. That's two different issues.
Yeah, just if you use one, you need we're talking about all of a sudden needing a different permit from the county.
Well, no, I don't think so. Let's clarify this, because I'd say you could have a structureless grow, and then that's you're meeting the conditions of your location to be allowed to grow without a structure, right? Like you're far enough away, you're not influencing whatever, so you've met the county requirements for that. But then you want to have a structure of some kind, but maybe it isn't of the type that the county would be requiring to have you in a closer in zone. You get what I'm saying? So like, let's say you're on ag land, and this kind of structure that the county requires is X, Y, and Z, right? It's got to be just right? Now, I'm not limited to using only that type of structure everywhere, right? Let's say I'm in an area where the county doesn't even care if I use a structure or not. Then I get to pick the structure so long as it meets building codes, right? Does that make sense? I can use a greenhouse where the sides roll up or whatever. Right? That's two totally different things. Just because I'm not building the superstructure that the county wants for a sensitive ag zone doesn't mean that I'm prevented from using a structure, period. Right? Does that make sense?
Well, so what we've discussed so far is allowing cultivation in a structure and in an existing structure in the coastal zone. So what you're now talking about is if we're going to allow it without a structure, if that is what the recommendation will be, I don't see any problem with using a structure if you have a permit to cultivate with no structure. The issue is cultivating without a structure is going to be more difficult for the Coastal Commission. It's going to be more difficult for the Board of Supervisors to swallow in ag land. I think it's, I mean,
Let me just,
in the structure is kind of where we've been going.
let me point out to you where I'm coming from with this. Is this, maybe this more clearly defines the issue that I see with this. So we've talked about, from what I gathered all here, indoor cultivation. We're talking about requiring filtering, we're talking about requiring no light leakage, which is fine. We're talking about certain setbacks because of ventilation and all that good stuff. And that's in a structure, and that ordinance, the way I'm picturing it being written, is specific to these things. And so if we want to talk about outdoor cultivation and using that in some scenarios, the exact same structure, and if we're going to write the ordinance differently and say maybe it doesn't need the same ventilation requirements because it's now an outdoor license, and how do you ventilate outdoor free-flowing air?
You don't have to.
Yeah, so if, as long as in an outdoor ordinance we encompass that type of said structure and then don't require its ventilation like we do in the indoor ordinance, then I don't see a problem with that. We're good with that.
Why require
Maybe
the
that's
structure, though, in a place where nobody cares? That's the whole point.
Well, in a greenhouse.
Why?
Well, because if you have a greenhouse even on timberland, it's going to require what we were talking about.
Why?
Indoor
Why?
permit.
Why? No, that's not
what
don't
I
think
heard.
yeah, but I don't think that's accurate. And I think that's what I was trying to clear up, is that just because you're using some type of structure doesn't mean that that you're in the structured ordinance that Joel's talking about. It doesn't bind you in the way that you're thinking, I think. I think it's that if you're going to be in these places where you could piss people off, then you have to build the structure like the county wants. If you're not in a place where you're going to piss people off, you can build whatever the heck you want, as long as you're following California building code. That's kind of what I'm getting at. It doesn't have to be exactly that, but that's the concept.
I think, yeah, I think I'm with you. I think the issue is, where are these areas where you can grow outside of
Right. So I'd like to take Joel's advice that open air growing in ag lands is probably not politically palatable at this time, and we just not go there right now. That's my input on that. Blake might back me up on that. I don't know.
So I'm throw myself out here again. What is open air growing? What do you define as open air growing? Just absolutely no structure, period? No roof, no nothing?
No.
outside of a permanent enclosed structure.
Okay, so this gets back to what we first discussed on what a structure is. A greenhouse is a structure where the sides go missing and the roofs come off sometimes.
Yeah, it doesn't meet the definition that the county's talking about.
Well, it might, it depends.
Right, but it doesn't matter. That's what we're trying to say, right?
Yeah, I mean, we can figure that out, but if, you know, if it can be fully enclosed,
Yeah, that's a different conversation.
Right.
Yeah.
what we're talking about is, does it limit or mitigate those impacts the community is worried about, which are smell and sight?
Right. I want to talk about grows like the one I want to have, which is not going to have a structure that can in any way mitigate any of the impacts, period. but it may be a structure that requires a building permit, right? Okay, that's what I want to talk about specifically. Where is that appropriate? County council saying that grow may not be politically palatable in ag lands.
I don't think that grow is politically palatable anywhere but timberland.
Right. I think you're right. So,
I don't know if I agree with it.
right.
Is that more from your perspective of maybe we're gonna see hemp out there, or is that just wanting to develop agriculture?
Well, it's under definitely that I want to see agricultural hemp grown in ag land in Smith River area. And I don't want it to be said cannabis, because cannabis is hemp and in marijuana usage. And if it's going to regulate Smith River, I think that hemp is a crop that can be grown in the coastal zone and in the ag area out there that would benefit the community. And I really just don't want to have the regulations that this may implement on it.
There's no danger that anything we're talking about here will have any impact on hemp.
No, the only other thing I was thinking when I hear that is that it's not palatable for the community in ag land. And there's lots of ag land that is just so far removed from public visibility. Why would it be a problem for there to be, and this is just a ridiculous statement, 20 plants 2.5 miles from a road, when it's okay in TPZ land to have 20 plants 20 feet from a road that someone could drive by. I mean, I just don't see the argument that it's just not appropriate at all, period, in ag land. I get it, maybe there are more setbacks involved, and we can talk about that maybe secondarily to talking about TPZ land first, but to arbitrarily wash it away seems a little bit weird to me. But yeah, we can.
Yeah, I mean, the way I feel about the ag land usage is that, I've just kind of ceded some of the political perspective or the community-based opinions to the people who live in those zones. They kind of know the people. And so, I mean, I would agree that, I would allow it in ag zones with specific setbacks. I don't really see the need to, again, think about every single person and what they are going to feel about it, and how that's going to impact the community. Again, I don't know the community in those areas, so I don't know how they would react to seeing an outdoor open air grow, but I would hate to not see the capability happen if that was the will of the people in that area.
It's definitely a more appropriate scenario outside of the ag zones as far as the viability of doing it. I mean, that's no question. As far as a quote-unquote open air grow, which is different than an outdoor license type from the state. But yeah, totally open air grow for certain type of production, then yeah, it's probably more appropriate outside of ag zones. So yeah, we can definitely center the conversation to start in a different zone than an ag zone, and talk about that towards the end maybe.
Public acceptability and palatability may be completely different from board palatability. They may not be the same.
I don't think they're the same at all.
I think they're they're different. It's, different ways of, it's easier to gauge what the board will do than it is what the entire public is going to average out to be. It's too late for it now, but it'd be good to at some point start talking about in the future forming an advisory vote, a non-binding sort of advisory vote that goes to the ballot that the whole county weighs in on, and where the questions are carefully formed, or they're really broad, something like that. And then that would be kind of the only way to actually gauge what the public wants as a whole, is to have a good set of questions and then let the entire community weigh in during an election time, But short of that, we don't really have access to that. We can only guess, and the circles are sort of closed from one another, People live in their groups, you hear kind of the same thing. And and they don't cross over all the time. So that's sort of difficult to gauge public perception, but what we are dealing with in reality is board perception and the palatability of the 5 members of the board. So we kind of got to start there, and then they can take the heat from the people in whichever direction, I suppose.
I would say, I don't think we would necessarily need to limit it from being applied for. I think it's not viable. I don't think it's, it's, and then so we've got three things that can mitigate it from happening at all. And that's that it's really not, it's not viable for a drug crop with California's regulations, really, and also the board can scrap anything they don't like. They've done it before. They can scrap a sentence off of whatever we suggest. Setbacks. And setbacks could be the other mitigator there. And again, the board doesn't like it. I don't think they're going to scrap the whole thing. I think they're just going to say that part's not tasteful to me.
All right, well, I'm talking about some specifics about this license type in ag areas. Maybe that could be a quick conversation before we get into timberland, even if we feel like timberland's suitable. There's, that's a long discussion, maybe.
You might go to public comment if anybody has any.
Any other public comment? Sorry. So, 20-acre parcels, just if we're going to come up with some kind of recommendation, we get some numbers on this.
Well, I know we're kind of got it pretty small here, but it was maybe 6 weeks ago or so, I thought we had Blake kind of going 5,000, 10 acres, 10,000, 20. So as far as the size scale.
I don't remember that for open air growing.
That's when we were talking about timberland.
Timberland.
We kind of evaded that subject and left off there and went off.
So are we specifically talking about timberlands now?
No, I'm sorry. I was talking about ag lands. Okay. I thought we'd just start with that.
Yeah, I would say they're definitely, if we're talking about ag land, open air growing, nothing under 20 acres, I would think would be achievable for setbacks.
Start there.
When we're talking about the setbacks of.
So we were talking on Moorhead Road, those are being more of the 5 to 10s.
Right. I think those might be suitable for these 500 square foot indoors, but maybe not the open air growing. What do you guys think? It's just too close.
So those properties, and I get totally confused when we talk about this. Those properties, for example, would be appropriate then, in your opinion, for from the state getting an outdoor permit, and then the county a structured permit.
Correct.
For a greenhouse.
Or at least applying those structure thoughts and requirements towards it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it would look like an indoor permit, except for, let's
no
say your light usage was below that threshold, and then so from
Except there's 0 lights, and it's an outdoor permit from the state.
But see, and that's where the definitions of the details, what the state defines as indoor versus outdoor. You can use a certain amount of watts and not be considered indoor. And so, yeah, you could have a structured greenhouse with an an open air grow.
That's all I'm thinking about, because in the coastal areas, these are the appropriate outdoor grows.
I mean, we're
in a greenhouse.
We're full on flowering maturity time, and we're foggy outside.
Yeah, I wouldn't worry about what the state calls what the state names the license types. I would say just forget about that. It doesn't matter what the state calls it.
Yeah, I think at this point, probably for the sake of.
Well, I think you're going to run into the same factor that you're all afraid of right now, of board approval. If you're not going to do it what the state's telling you, the way they regulate it, and then you're going to try to pass something else through the board, they're going to have opposing positions, as they do already.
So we'll have to help them to understand the details, which could be a long process. I don't know.
Well, so
hopefully they're watching every word of this meeting, so they already are ahead of us.
Outdoor, visually unimpacted growing, whatever we want to start with, because clearly what we're starting with is trying to be restrictive, and with the theoretical opinion that in the future we would adopt more lenient regulations or expanded regulations that could help perpetuate business. So yeah, that's not a huge concern. That's not a huge probably demand of the community, let's say at large, to how big or where is my completely structured outdoor grow in coastal zones. So yeah.
So we got 20-acre parcels for these kind of operations. What about setbacks from residential? Or, see, how did we do that? We weren't talking about dwelling. If you're in ag land, and then if you have a residential zone next to the ag land, that's where we got into setbacks, right? Not dwellings or residences, but so
From property
so we
lines.
need to add that then, you know, so we can't just have a 20-acre parcel because you could have that adjacent to a res zone and then you can't have it right next to it. So it's 1,000 feet maybe? 2? Does it take 2? I mean, I can smell that size from 1,000, but not all the time. It's got to be warm and the wind's going the right way, but you can tell that it's there. It's not, you know, it takes 500 feet for it to get powerful, you know.
What size is that one out there at Church Street?
3,000 square feet.
That's how far it is away from the property line?
Oh, it's 3,000 square feet, but it's 20 feet from the street. It's like 100 feet from somebody's house. It's like 1,000 feet from everybody's house in the entire.
Yeah, and then that also, I mean, technically, that could be used as a structured grow. So we would fall back under structured grow.
It's too close to the, it would,
Yeah,
even
it
in
wouldn't
structured,
work,
it would
even
be
on the
too
structured grow.
close.
But I'm just saying that particular thing is actually in a structured greenhouse, whether it's being used with plastic or not, would be a different.
But it has
Talk.
walls that can come up.
It's
Yes.
not in a structure as defined by what Joel's talking about, requiring a structure that can mitigate the effects.
No, but it is in Kurt's addition of a greenhouse that you can take roofs off or move them. You
Yeah.
can move sides up and you're considered an outdoor.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so now you got me totally confused when you said this doesn't mitigate the effects that Joel's talking about.
A greenhouse that opens up doesn't.
Every greenhouse opens up. Every greenhouse, the sides can
We're not
come
talking
off
about
and the
greenhouse,
roofs
we're
can
talking
come
about
off.
structures. Well, you
But a
can
greenhouse
build,
is a structure. I'm just saying, that's what we're talking about, are we not, Joel, that a greenhouse
it's
is a
not
structure?
confusing to define this, though. I don't understand, I'm really missing where the confusion is. I don't care if you call your structure a greenhouse or a mouse house or whatever. If it doesn't allow, if the air has to be filtered and it doesn't allow light leakage, then it fits the definition Joel's talking about. Call it whatever you want, right?
Yeah.
All right. So 1,000 feet, 2,000 feet? Do we need 2,000 feet from open air blowing weed in the wind?
From all property lines, you're pretty much mitigating.
Residential
from
property
residential-
lines.
residential
Yeah,
property
just like we did with the indoor ag.
Yeah, I mean, you know,
On the indoor, we went 1,000, right?
No,
no, we went like 200.
100 or 200 or something.
Yeah, 100 or, I think it's 200.
Because you can get rid of the smell, so you can
Yeah,
go
I guess
much
I'm gonna be a
closer.
real stickler and say I don't agree at all with this, because it's going down a path that I just don't see as feasible for local coastal community ag land. Completely, I'm off the boat now.
Well, that's why we weren't going to do it, but you said it needs
Well,
to be
I'm
an ag land.
just, every corner we take about talking about a greenhouse goes down a path that I disagree with. Because outdoor growing in coastal ag land will be in a greenhouse as defined by the state.
Then use a greenhouse.
So then you're telling me that it has to be filtered?
No,
and
you can use whatever the hell greenhouse you want if you're far enough away. If you got a 20-acre parcel and
So
you're
when you
1,000 feet
grow
from a res
outdoor
zone,
with a greenhouse, the sides come up.
who cares?
Joel does.
No, he doesn't.
He just says it
No, he
doesn't
does
want
not.
it to be.
I don't care. I don't care what you do outdoor.
Okay, so
So I'm not sure, let's backtrack a little bit because there's clearly some confusion. When we're talking about requiring it to be in a permanent structure, we're talking about having impacts that can be totally mitigated. When we're talking about outdoor or without a structure, we're talking about an area where we've decided that visual and odor impacts aren't a problem. So who really cares if you're using a greenhouse in that situation?
Okay.
Are we?
So in that situation, I would argue that ag lands are completely appropriate, and that
Okay.
TPZ lands are not the only appropriate place in this county. In fact, ag lands could be just as or more appropriate in those scenarios that you just discussed
I think.
with the proper setback.
I
Right.
think,
Like 1,000 feet or 2,000 feet.
Or something like that,
I'd like
yeah.
to nail this number down. We
Yeah,
got
I
20
mean, there's
acres.
some type of setback, yeah.
1,000 feet?
With,
2,000 feet?
and then that would
5,000 feet?
require no fencing or anything like that. It's just
Right.
straight up growing. You're doing it in a structure.
Yeah, naked
out of a
ground,
structure.
naked ground.
Doesn't matter. And then we're just talking about a setback, which is different than a setback for potentially that very same structure if it's being classified under the indoor and you're
Right.
following all those parameters.
Right.
So,
Yeah, so basically,
Yeah.
you know, if you had your Ag 20 and you wanted to do a 5,000 square foot indoor grow, you could be 200 foot from your property line, from a residential zone. If you wanted to do an open air grow with less investment in infrastructure, you'd have to have 1,000 foot separation from a residential spot in order to do that open air grow.
yeah.
Either you could do your open air grow in a greenhouse, roll up your sides, or just put your
That
tops
makes-
on when the rain comes.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I mean, that makes more sense as we started to just kind of whittle down.
So then
what
when we
all-
talk about it, what we're actually talking about is from somebody's residential piece of property, they can possibly look out and 1,000 feet away
Will be an open air grow.
could be an open air grow.
Maybe in a greenhouse,
Or maybe-
maybe not.
yeah.
With just trellises.
Line of sight
Just
rules?
depends.
Yeah, because that would then open up line of sight.
And that's where my
That would be the next
thinking
stop.
comes from, and my thinking comes from, and again, this is not, you're not gonna get a whole lot of these completely just, there's giant plants standing straight out in a field in Fort Dick or in Klamath or something like that, right? Most of the times, they're gonna be encompassed in what is visually a greenhouse to somebody. And so, in my mind, I'm thinking that when I'm looking out from my residential piece of property 1,000 feet away and I see a greenhouse, that's less impactful to me, pretending I'm somebody who is completely anti-cannabis, as opposed to looking 1,000 feet out and seeing a 30-foot tall plant. I have maybe a different perception of what I'm seeing.
Definitely.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so that was the angle I was thinking out from the beginning. I don't think I'm describing it properly or.
Well, you are, I get it. I think
you know.
for this purposes, we're talking about, it could be either or.
Yeah.
With this situation, it could be, you could just be seeing naked plants, or you could see them in a greenhouse. And I see what you're saying, is there's an in-between, there's open air, there's the fully mitigatable structure, and then there's something in between, kind of like what you're talking about, where it isn't completely open, it isn't mitigatable, but it
It's
sort
an
of
environmental
is.
necessity and
I don't know
stuff
if
that
that's
you
really
grow.
a
I mean, as a
minutia worth
farmer,
getting into.
truthfully, as an agricultural producer or a farmer, you're going to realize your environment and you're going to do what you have to do.
You can still see the
for
plants,
crop
though. I mean, if
growing.
you're opening your greenhouse up, the weed hater can see the plants, you know, for that time. So it just doesn't really make any difference. I don't
I'm
know.
just wanting to consider that when we
Sure.
talk about that. Is there a different setback for that, or is it just, we're just talking about, is it good for 1,000, or we need more, or we need less? or-
Right. So I guess
There's two
I would
little
have
bit
a-
different scenarios.
I would have a question for Joel for, about palatability with the board. I mean, a palatable thing for the board, 1,000-foot setback with an open-air grow and an ag land, is that something that's palatable for the board, from what you might think?
I will ask them. Because like we did with the last two ordinances, before we send this to planning commission, we gotta go, I'll take it to the board and tell them the details so they can object. Because I don't wanna waste a bunch of time on this if they are not having it.
Yeah, I mean, truthfully, I'd hate to waste a lot of time, and we've already wasted a lot of time on ag land and flower production when we truly realize that, I mean, we may get some people who invest, but the real outdoor cultivation is going to happen in our timberlands. That's the most productive space.
One thing that we might think about putting in this ordinance, or a recommendation to try to alleviate that concern or that possibility, we could put something in there about if it's an outdoor we're using this type of structure that would be normal in these coastal lands for outdoor production. In your use permit planning, you would be defining, will the plants be visible at any time during the growth? Meaning, like, are you going to have the roofs off? You know, if your plan is, I'm gonna have the roofs off and all this stuff, then there would maybe be either a different setback or a different consideration.
Or is that even necessary? I mean, do we even necessarily need to go into that much detail? I mean, if we
That's-
put a sizable setback from a
Line
residential
of sight
property,
consideration.
it should be mitigated. I mean, 1,000 foot away, you'd have a hard time defining if that's a Photinia, 30-foot tall Photinia row, or if it's a
Completely
30-foot
agree.
tall cannabis row.
Completely agree.
I mean, I would
Okay.
hope that the coastal land could get to 30 feet tall, but I highly doubt it.
Okay. Well, maybe the aesthetic thing at that distance isn't such.
They would if
an
your
issue
greenhouse was
then.
30 foot tall and you took the roof off.
Possibly. 100 foggy days a year, you might need to uptick your.
Here's something to consider for the viability of ag lands for production of flower. There are CBD varieties that are really resistant to mold and fog and the things that get you on the coast. And while we're waiting for the state to get with it, with the hemp program, the state regulators have decided that they regulate CBD because there is no hemp program, and so any CBD you have came from, their regulatory system. So I could see a situation where the price of CBD now is high enough still that you could produce these varieties that I have and have experience with, and probably successfully take them to maturity for extraction on the coast, and do it economically because there's water and there's square footage and soil, like free soil already in the ground that you don't have in the mountains. And so the cost of production would be really low and the value of CBD is pretty high. So
It continues to rise.
I think
there's
somebody
other
knows what
oils that
they're-
are becoming.
somebody knows what they're doing
mainstream.
could create jobs and have a viable business on the coast producing CBD.
I think that's totally true, up until the point that the state, gets together with its hemp program, then,
Right.
the growing of a CBD, cannabis flower would be pretty non-existent because you'd get the production from hemp for the CBD. But yeah, I mean, I think that's a viable option for ag land. I mean, somebody like Robert, or anybody else who was interested in doing CBD production, that, definitely would be perfect for it.
It could be something farther down the line, but like Yolo County has a different tax rate for CBD plants. I don't know exactly how they ascertain that testing, I don't know their method. I know how it can be done, but I don't know how they're doing it. That could be something that makes it palatable to the board, right? Like it's CBD dominant plants only on the coast and ag land, I don't know.
How about we kind of table some of the ag talk for now, and let Joel maybe get to the board with the 1,000-foot visual impact, how they would palatably feel about that on an ag land. Maybe we start talking about our timber stuff, because that's going to take up a long
Okay,
time.
yeah, last 10, 15 minutes here.
Yeah.
Talk about timberland. We talked about roads with the road department. That seems like a huge issue. Maybe first talk about timberland areas where you're close to pavement. So we take the road issue off the table and just talk about timberland itself once you're already there. So then, of course, you've got water and your typical environmental regulations, CAL FIRE regulations for clearing and conversion, water board regulations. All this stuff's already in place. We talked about possibly having additional enforcement in situations where it seemed like the state wouldn't have the resources to check often enough or whatever. I don't know what that
I'd be
looks like.
interested to know more, because I don't know enough about what all the zonings are in
TPZ range or the
timberlands as a generic term for these, like and I get the TPZ and the different zonings, but what are all the different zonings that are up there?
Yeah, in timberland land use designations, you're really dealing with TPZ and PO, public ownership.
Is ag forestry considered a timberland designation, or sometimes?
It might be.
Okay,
Yeah.
depends on where it is.
Yeah, in some areas of Klamath, I would imagine there's some of that.
So to generically go back to this place we keep talking about, low divide, right, is just because I am familiar with that area, and I know that both of the lands you just talked about are probably in very close proximity up there, is essentially everything then up low divide is either classified as a TPZ or a PO land, basically?
Yeah, it's really checkerboarded
Yeah.
up there, but it's all timberland, land use designation.
I've looked and looked, and I haven't seen any parcels up there that aren't
So
zoned either PO or TPZ.
Yeah, so the question I had was, and we talked about this before, and I don't think it was very clear exactly, was, so when we pull a permit for TPZ land, and does that then require that it gets zoned out of TPZ because it's now in commercial production? No? Yes?
Maybe. Some counties are and some counties aren't. So.
Yeah, I think that we should require you to rezone your TPZ if you're going to grow. I mean, you're getting a deferred tax status for being TPZ, but you're really growing cannabis, not trees. I think it's equitable to have people rezone those. But, but you can do 3-acre waiver type programs that don't in any way impact the ability of the property to be used for timber and get around it.
I know there's tons of unpermitted and I guess or illegal housing happening on these TPZ zone properties, but in order for someone to build a house on a TPZ zoned property, does that require that it changes the zoning?
You need a use permit. So there are very few things that you can do on TPZ that are principally permitted except growing, harvesting timber.
Grazing.
Yeah, building a house would require a use permit, and there are a few other things.
And
that are,
to get that use permit, that wouldn't require a rezoning of the property, or would it?
No, the use permit would not, but a conversion of that land to something that is growing and harvesting timber, or specifically laid out in our code right now, would require.
I mean, that's from my, and I'm very naive, I think, on what exactly got things classified as TPZ zone land, but my understanding of that was just retroactive to help deforestation, was to let people keep their basically empty property with trees on it, as changing the zoning to TPZ.
Yeah, it was a voluntary opt-in thing like in the 70s, and you could jump into it and put your land in TPZ and get out of the taxes if you're just letting it go for trees. But it's timber production zone, not timber preservation zone that a lot of people think it is.
You need to have a harvest plan. It's not just for sitting around growing trees. It's to defer your taxes so you're not paying taxes on years where you have no yield.
So this may be a question for the tax people. When you pull a use permit and you build a house on TPZ land and then you get assessed for your improvements, you're now paying property taxes on your improvements just as you would ordinarily. You're not getting tax deferment on your improvements, but the land, or basically, is that correct? So
it stays in TPZ zone.
So some counties,
paying more taxes.
Some counties have listed on their uses permitted or permitted with a use permit in TPZ land things like greenhouses and other agricultural things. That is a thing. A TPZ isn't a state definition. It's a county specific. I mean, there's state over rules, but then you can add in other uses. A locality or municipality can add other uses to it. Humboldt, for example, greenhouses are principally permitted in the TPZ. So I don't know if there's a way that makes sense to be able to recuperate tax loss through assessing of improvements that you pull permits for. Because I know when the value of the land goes up, you pull some taxes from that, but I think the bulk of it comes from improvements, but maybe I'm off on that.
Yeah, I think that's a conversation for the assessor.
Okay.
You know, I think they assess up to an acre of improvements if there is a permitted use.
I'm just concerned, I'd be concerned from a county's perspective if we let the cannabis permit used on a TPZ zoned land, and then as a county, we're going to be required that we rezone that property, that could cause a problem down the line when cannabis maybe disappears from these properties, and then all of a sudden now they're not TPZ zoned lands, and
Couldn't
people
you
are
just rezone it?
back to, maybe, but
expensive to keep
that's really
doing
hard, I
that.
think.
Could there be an incentive from the county to lessen the impact
Well, it has to be,
financially someone?
has to
or-
be 20 acres to go into the TPZ, but you can come out of it if you're smaller, I think, or it has to be 80 to go into the TPZ or something
So,
like that.
you know, a lot of the land where we're likely to see cannabis growing is on not particularly great land, where there's not a big yield value. It's been sitting in TPZ since '78 or whatever. No one's ever harvested, no probably will. This is an opportunity to get that back on the tax rolls, right? It shouldn't probably be tax deferred because nobody's planning on harvesting any timber on it. If you were, you wouldn't be growing cannabis there, right? Green Diamond's not going to suddenly start growing a bunch of cannabis. They're actually harvesting trees.
Well, they're totally compatible, though. You can have a tiny little pinprick for your garden, and then there's tons and tons of acres of timberland, and they don't affect one another. So but there also are TPZ properties that don't produce productive timberland. I have a piece of TPZ. The county assesses it at $113. So they don't send a bill because that'd be $1.30, right? Right next to it, I have a piece of property that's zoned PO. It's exactly the same, but it's assessed at $25,000. It's only $250 a year. It's not that much difference in revenue. If I were to build a house there and spend $200,000, now I'm generating real revenue for the county, but changing, it's a little more revenue than just going from a property that's assessed at $100 to now assessed at $25,000. That's not that much
I think
revenue.
that's why I was kind of getting at how the county would assess somebody building a house on TPZ zone, and from what
Just
I've
the
gathered
normal way,
here,
I
it's
think.
just basically a reassessment of value for the property, however it stays in TPZ zoning after you pulled your use permit and built your house. Is that a right culmination of that, or?
Seems like they could assess the property up too at that point, but we got to ask the assessor that maybe.
I mean,
Yeah.
obviously they're going to reassess the property after you've made improvements on it.
They will, yeah. I mean, I think we should get the assessor involved, you know, with this one. But
Okay.
I do agree with Joel that, you know, we should not be having, you know, TPZ lands that aren't,
Sure.
that aren't.
It's not the end of the world to rezone TPZ. The only concern I have is that, let's say you had a really nice large parcel of TPZ, 250 acres, let's say, and you want to pull a 2,500 square foot permit in an area of the land that doesn't produce timber. It's already been cleared decades ago, say. It doesn't make sense to rezone that entire 250 acre parcel. You know what I mean? Like, I guess you could subdivide or something, but it just seems like in certain situations, there would be a way for the county to enjoy reasonable tax revenue and still have the land be in TPZ. Because, like, question for the assessor, I don't know if when you put an improvement on a TPZ, so there's two different ways they improve it, change assessments. There's assessments of your structures and assessments of the land. And my Prop 13, I think, prevents real changes of assessment of your land just because you build a structure on it. So I think that applies no matter what. They don't get to come and assess your land up. They assess the improvement up. Your tax bill goes up, but there's two categories on your tax bill: land assessment, improvements assessments. And I think Prop 13 prevents land assessments from going up much under any circumstances. So I don't see how, and then the fact that the assessed value, like my two parcels, TPZ, PO, right next to one another, it's a $250 difference a year to the county between one being in PO and one being TPZ, and it's not that much compared to.
Well, there's also then, if you rezoned it, the recoupment, right? There's 10 years of taxes you're going to pay. So it starts to add up. And then
Sure.
you've got to think about the application of $250 a parcel over lots of parcels. That may be a lot more significant than your individual parcel. And then there is the public policy of land sitting around in TPZ that you're not going to harvest. Like, you're not going to do it. it's assessed so low because your harvest isn't probably worth very much. That land needs to get out of TPZ.
Right.
And this is a good opportunity to make that.
But what about the land that is nice TPZ though, that should, and you're only using a part of it? I guess maybe just it's up to you to carve off a part of it if you can do that and rezone a part of it maybe, I guess.
I don't know, it'd be hard to rezone. It'd be hard to subdivide.
I would think that that would be under a county level. If you're thinking that TPZ needs to be rezoned, you need to do that at a county level, not at a cannabis level. I don't think that it's something that we have to put into our section of this.
Yeah, I think if the board would like to see that happen, an opportunity for them to change that, I think that should be something they just enact.
It sounds like there's...
The board can't just willy-nilly rezone TPZ the way the property owner can.
Okay. I mean, my concern, I guess, and maybe I'm echoing a little bit of what Robert's feeling too, is that we're getting kind of caught up in rezoning of properties versus forming a device as to how it should be used for cannabis.
Yeah. No, I get that. I'm just thinking about, I guess my advice would change if someone said that every single TPZ property that wanted this had to change to this, and it would cause this. And so then I would have maybe different advice. And so what I'm hearing is there's essentially two ways to go about it. It's going to get rezoned if you're going to do cannabis on it. Or, I don't know which one I like better because I don't understand them all enough. There just needs to be a use permit reassessment of the improvement on your property, like you did a structure like a house, because you're pulling I hear when you build the house on it, you're pulling a use permit and then you're getting a structural assessment raise on your property tax value. So you had a dollar property tax on a TPZ loan and you put a $100,000 property or $100,000 house on it assessment, then you're going to get the dollar plus the 100,000 assessment. And so if you pulled a use permit to put cannabis on the property, I would think that there's the possibility that you could be just operating it as a structural improvement on that TPZ zone land. So that would be the one way to go about it. The other way would be just straight up you had to rezone. And what would you rezone to? PO land? Like what would be the choice to rezone from a TPZ when this
probably AF.
It has to do with what's around it, though, isn't there?
What's AF?
Ag forest.
Ag forest, okay.
What about spot zoning? I heard there's some prohibitions on spot zoning where you have one parcel with nothing like it around. You can't do that, right?
Right, but you got to think about what nothing around it,
What that means.
Yeah, I mean, if it's all timberland, some of it's got a specific tax status, some of it doesn't. You're not spot zoning.
Okay.
Spot zoning is like if you put a Walmart in the middle of the forest because one property owner rezoned it to commercial because they had the clout to do it.
So it's a similar land use, it's okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is there much AF anywhere? Ag forest?
No, we don't have a lot of AF. We should. Probably all of our PO should be AF. But that's a conversation for another day.
Well, I think
it's currently mostly AF, but
I don't have a problem with the requiring of not allowing cannabis permits on TPZ land. That's basically what we're looking at. It's just not allowed on TPZ land. You got to go through the rezone process first, make it something else, and then you can get into the permit process. Or maybe there's some way to do those concurrently. I don't know.
I guess I'll play my own devil's advocate. Then I'll say, well, how do we feel about PO property? Because I have a PO property.
Yeah, it's all tax normal.
If it were up to me, cannabis would only be allowed on AF, and then you figure out how to get your land in AF. But so it's not going to be up to me. I don't think planning wants to do all that work. So,
well, if you were going to pick, pick a designation that made the most but
I'd like
literal
to ask you a question
yes,
on that. What are your concerns with that? Why would you consider a PO property needing to switch from PO? And it's various amounts of uses.
What are the principally permitted uses?
So PO is land that either is in public ownership or was really close to the parks or something, and we thought it was compatible to be owned by public ownership. The general plan doesn't actually have consistent land use designations for PO. If you are owned by a public entity, I think we have a separate land use designation for that. I can't remember the details of it, but we have a consistency chart that doesn't make sense. We'll have to fix it. And one easy way to fix it is to take all that PO and private ownership and just change it to AF.
That's just the easy fix.
That's
not
the
easy.
fix.
That sounds.
It's the one-off, it's the one-off form of easiness,
It's
rather than the
right.
ongoing.
It's a
I
big
guess I
pro-
just look at it like, I mean, you know, I've read through the definitions of general use and use compatibility for the PO properties, and I mean, I can define a lot of different potential uses within what's stated in the little printout that you get from the planning commission for PO. And so I guess I'm just.
Yeah, I don't think that cannabis is like inconsistent with the other uses that are allowed. Even with TPZ, probably, I mean, grazing. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think you can do it,
Sure.
a mill, you know.
Oh, you can do a mill on PO, you can, you know,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of different things that you can do with a
You can do a
use
sawmill
permit
on
or.
TPZ
You can't do
land, too.
agriculture on PO though.
No.
Well,
it's
you
not.
can
You're
if
right.
you pull a
It's not.
farm stand permit and you use that farm stand as a, you know, an avenue for
Right.
production of your
Right,
on-site
can you do an orchard?
agriculture.
Is an orchard one of the PO uses?
Planning
It's not,
commission, building
I mean, I have
hates
an
that
orchard
one.
on our property that, you know, is beautiful and great, and I've talked to Taylor a few times about wanting to pull a farm stand.
You can also have a guest ranch, but they won't tell me what that means
Yeah,
until
you could have
after
a
I get my
country club
permit.
with or without a golf course. I mean, you know, that's fairly broad when you think of a
So
country
keep,
club.
keep in mind that in general, if you're on timberland, you know, you now have kind of the Board of Forestry involved in your life, and you're not going to be able to convert it to a use incompatible with the harvesting of timber without a conversion permit or a waiver. So it's not necessarily just a local issue of compatibility. You know, the state wants to see timberland stay timberland and harvestable timber stay in use for that. And so there's kind of a bigger conversation about what timberland is and what it's for when we're talking about, can you kind of sneak in with the other group of things you're allowed, cannabis cultivation. And for instance, in the coastal zone, and there is some coastal timber, cannabis cultivation in that coastal timber is an absolute non-starter as far as the Coastal Commission is concerned. They're not going to let us do it. And if you think there's probably some environmental reasons why they don't want it in TPZ or in what they call CT, you know, there's all of those same issues probably in non-coastal. We just don't have the Coastal Commission tell us what to do about it. But we still have those things to mitigate. We still have the basic principles of why it's timberland in the first place. It's a harvestable, CAL FIRE. You know, we have things going on that's never going to be that simple. That's why we saved it to the end, right? Cultivating on timberland is not terribly simple. The TPZ issue with the taxes and the whatnot is just kind of another complicating factor, which is why I like the idea of just making people rezone them, because then we recoup taxes, we get more taxes going forward, and I think it'd be more palatable to the board. I've mentioned this to the board before, and I feel like they were approving of the idea of having people rezone, put that whole parcel. My personal fear is that even if you have a great piece of property that could be harvested and you can find a corner where there's no trees and you can put your cannabis cultivation on it, if you've got a profitable, you know, cultivation operation, your timberland might be nice, but you're not going to worry about it anymore. You've got a different economic activity that is going to be your driver, and therefore you've kind of unintentionally taken that timberland out of potential harvest.
Gotcha.
There's two things and where it's past noon, so I guess I'll be real brief, but
Yeah, hurry up,
the
Kurt.
two largest concerns I had with that are kind of completely different from each other. The one would be you rezone your TPZ land to ag forest or whatever it is here, and then you don't get this benefit maybe anymore that you get from having a TPZ loan. So you cut all your trees down and you forget about the trees, right? So we're possibly perpetuating cutting of trees down, right, and not replacing them. But the other concern I had would be how does, and this would be more of a financial question maybe that needs to be addressed at a different time. When you rezone to ag forest and then the cannabis economy drops out and the person who owns that property walks away from it and then the county has to, I guess, take it back. What kind of financial burdens or are you losing from the person who was paying on TPZ land and now is not, all that.
It'd be worth a lot more. It'd be easy to sell ag forestry land. I mean, that's great zoning. There's a
Well,
lot
if you rezone it and it becomes taxable and then you flake and you can't grow cannabis on it, all you're leaving behind really is a taxable parcel. Whereas if you do it on TPZ that we're not taxing and you flake, now you just leave us a nuisance site.
Right.
It's still untaxable.
Saying like right now you own TPZ land and you're keeping care of it, but you choose to move forward with cannabis because we've allowed it, and there is a great scenario in the future, or a very possible scenario in the future, where cannabis is something that is completely unpalatable in California at all, and it's done in other states entirely. And so this business model that we're talking about could just vanish. And so you have all this ag forest land that, again, has no use, or does it have use?
Oh, yeah, it's great. That's what I'm saying. It's great for the county to get property out of TPZ and into ag forestry. That's great for the economy. That's great for people building stuff and doing things. I mean, all the permitted uses are, it's like, it's a party, ag forestry, compared to TPZ. TPZ, you can picnic on TPZ and hike, but you're not allowed to camp like on your own TPZ.
So what are the defining differences between, I mean, I've heard Joel mention wanting to take PO property and rezone that in his, in the perfect world out of PO into ag forestry. What are the differences between ag forestry and PO? Because I'm a PO owner, and so I mean, my inherent need to protect the rights that I have on a property, or that. And I just don't know what ag forestry.
Let's get into those details. We're running over time, and then so in closing, before we do kind of talk about our agenda, I'm going to read the intent applicability of AF forestry districts, and it kind of sums up what it's about and what it's for. Because prime forest land is not a readily renewable resource, this district classification is intended to provide for the protection of timberlands from uses which may be in conflict therewith. The provisions of this section, therefore, shall be liberally interpreted to apply to forestry and agriculture and permitted agricultural uses, to that end that no other use shall be permitted. It is the intention of this section to prevent the subdividing of prime forest lands into lot sizes which might threaten the use of such lands near forest or timber production, and changes of loan from AF, maybe there's some misprints here, from AF to another classification are to be made only where such uses are in accord with the general plan. The following regulations shall apply in all F districts, and then it gives the principal permitted uses and all of that.
County code.
County code, uses permitted, management of land, forestry, production, harvest of trees. So it's the same thing you do with TPZ. Logging, single-family dwellings, home occupations. These are things that are not part of TPZ. Nurseries, greenhouses, one guest cottage, accessory buildings, animal husbandry. So I see why Joel likes this. It fits really well with business and ag, and it doesn't really interfere with timberland and TPZ. It's designed to protect that use also. So it's a great dual use zoning.
So what does AF allow for say on-site tourism-based stuff? As I'm thinking into the future as to what my dreams and aspirations would be, given the
country clubs and golf courses. Country clubs and golf courses are allowed with a use permit.
Oh, they are on AF.
Guest ranches, public stables, airports, asphalt batch plants.
Asphalt. I've always wanted to get into that.
So quite a bit.
There's also a forest recreation zoning.
Heidi said no to that. She thought it was too residential.
Maybe.
Because they're little parcels, they're like 2 acres sometimes.
Yeah, they are generally used as residential sites. That's commonly.
When I looked at the zoning, most of those seem to show up like kind of more in the neighborhoods than in timber. I didn't see any of that in timberland. I mean, where PO and TPZ is.
Yeah, it's sort of supposed to be kind of adjacent to residential and timberland, sort of a buffer.
Right.
So I think the biggest thing for next meeting, it sounds like, is to try to get from the county like a better understanding of exactly what it's going to entail to get properties into AF before you sit here and say that.
There's a rezone process. It's already spelled out. You fill out the paperwork and go to the board.
Let's hear it, let's
Okay.
get it on the table.
Yeah, we can talk about it. It'll be a pain in the ass. I know Heidi doesn't want to do it.
Then how do we get around not having to
What,
do
she
it?
wants to add a use to the PO or something like that?
Yeah, I don't know.
Is that the?
Well, there's just, it's basically what I hear is there's only, these are the only two avenues we have to talk about using of TPZ land. Either we're going to rezone it or we're going to reassess it. Because it doesn't sound to me like the county, or maybe, I don't know exactly what, is okay with just letting it roll as TPZ and then putting
Yeah.
commercial.
Well, rezoning of
growing on
TPZ,
it.
I think for sure, but the question is whether or not the PO, what to rezone it to.
Yeah.
And whether or not PO is even going to be allowed as a zoning. So the two options are to, or not two options, but two of the options are to put it in something like AF, where it's pretty obviously already permitted, or add something to the list of uses permitted with a use permit to PO. Is that kind of how that would work?
Yeah. I mean, we could add it as something with a use permit to any of these,
Right.
right? Even the TPZ, we could add it, and then as part of your process, you get your waiver from CAL FIRE. You're not going to harm your productiveness of your timber harvest, and then you just probably get reassessed on the small portion you're kind of taking to do it on. That's what Humboldt's doing. CAL FIRE doesn't like it. They don't want to see it on timberland anywhere if it were up to them, but it's not exactly, so.
Yeah, all land with a tree on it is timberland to CAL FIRE.
I don't know. I don't know if it's that extreme, but
It's the way Dad explained it to me when he came to my place, as long as, if you're changing the use, if you're cutting a tree to change the use of the land, he didn't care where on the planet it was, other than California, but it was about changing of use. Cutting a tree to change the use is,
Yeah, if you're
they don't like that.
cutting merchantable timber
Sure.
anywhere, yeah.
Right.
I mean, that would require a conversion. Yeah.
What if your property's already been converted? Are there any?
What do you mean
issues
been
there?
converted? You
Well-
have an on-file timber conversion?
Say you have a property that was
Oh,
used
illegally
as-
converted?
No, say.
It's just already
particularly
cleared,
the
you mean?
property that I have, was
Yeah,
used,
it's
from what I
illegally
understand, as a
converted.
staging point when they bore the tunnel. And so they converted it out of whatever it was before and have already created, Caltrans did it, or whatever the
Sure.
geoengineers were at that point.
It's always been that way, right?
It's
not
pretty
that
much
way.
been that way since they bored the tunnel through.
Sure.
It's been converted down. There are meadows and pastures. There's about 10 acres of agricultural land there.
Yeah, when the
Power grid runs right through the middle of the property, and we've actually just worked with the telecommunications people to grant an easement to allow for the installation of the broadband cables up to the new cell phone tower that's been installed on top of the tunnel.
They're flexible with
finalized that
CAL FIRE
easement,
is
so-
flexible with space, so they came to my place and I wanted to get a
And
building
truthfully, I
permit.
guess this would be a question that I would have to take up with you personally, because I don't know about what, prior had been done with that property for conversion, but I do know from talking to some of the old guys that had worked on that property or on that project for the tunnel, that was all done by Caltrans. It's on the highway, so.
When you're not cutting trees, CAL FIRE doesn't seem to be
Yeah,
that
that's
concerned. When they
kinda
came to
what I
my
thought,
place
too.
and I wanted to get a permit for a building, and I said, I want to put it here where there's no trees. He's like, well, then you don't need the permit, really. And I said, well, what about here where there's a tree? He's like, well, then you need the permit,
Okay, all right.
So that was how he explained it to me.
Okay.
All right, we're over time. On our agenda, we talked about, okay, so do we need to go back to the ag thing? Or we kind of, in terms of the stacking of licenses, are we kind of already talked about that up on the bigger parcels?
I
or-
think the only thing in ag that I don't think I have quite enough to just start writing the ordinance is out of a structure. The open air,
Okay.
whatever you want to call it. And I'll check with the board on Tuesday, on the 11th, during the cannabis update. We'll float it. And if they're all against it, which
I'm just going to call it outdoor, is that all right for the agenda? Call it outdoor cultivation?
There could be the chance that we become
Call whatever you
disbanded on Tuesday. We always have to worry about that.
What did you say,
The
Joe?
what?
There's the chance that we may be disbanded on the 11th.
Well, no, they might vote to
that
talk
didn't
about
get
it at
agenda.
a future meeting.
Didn't get agenda.
It's not on the agenda, so they can't vote on it. So. It will be talked about. Okay.
So, 6 months ago, 9 months ago, if I had brought up the idea to the board, you know, outdoor in agricultural zones, the answer would have been pretty predictably no. Attitudes have changed. I don't know how much. I don't know.
Okay, so do we need to separate it, or can we
I
just
still
keep?
think that in the structure on ag is a little bit of a push, and I'm a little curious to see how that's going to go over. I think out of a structure is something I wouldn't try,
Okay,
but we'll see how it goes.
so I'm just gonna leave item 2 the way it is then, and is that all right? Just, it's not specific to the zoning, we can continue our conversation about structureless outdoor naked growing on whatever the zoning for the agenda, okay. And then, do we want to talk about fee schedule ideas at the next meeting, or wait, not there yet, okay. Do we want to have the tax assessor answer questions? Does that need to be on the agenda for, or do we have questions for the tax
I think
assessor
before
right
we
now?
can get into the meat of talking about all the other ramifications or other parameters that we need to talk about with outdoor cultivation, it really boils down to the zoning. So we need to iron out what zoning we're liking or we're using, which then determines where it can all be, and then you can work back as to how that impacts
Okay.
everything.
So
So we
those are
really need to figure out the
discussions-
zoning.
Those are discussions that Heidi would probably have a lot to say about, because obviously, from what you've said, she has her own feelings about rezoning things. And
Right.
maybe, you know, so maybe if those discussions can happen, it could be a little
Well,
bit
and if we
easier
can
for
have
us.
that on our screen too, on the zoning, so that we can identify what's PO and what's you would like to be AF and what,
Taylor, is that feasible?
We have those,
Yeah, we already have
TPZ
those made up.
and PO.
we looked at those several meetings
distinguished?
ago.
I don't know if we have a PO and TPZ map, do we?
Yeah, we did.
I-
Heidi had brought it up.
Yeah, she
it's
brought it- we looked
on
at them
one
in
of
the
files.
books, and then
Oh, that's
at a
right,
couple
yeah, yeah.
meetings later, she had
Right.
it on the screen.
Yeah, those were good.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll just talk, so are we done with the indoor in a superstructure conversation?
In a nutshell.
For now?
Yeah, I'll figure that out.
Okay.
Just a reminder to anybody who's interested, the retail and manufacturing ordinance will be at the planning commission tonight at 6. If you want to attend.
Did not know that. Guess I have to stay in town.
Boy, thanks for the notice, Joe. Okay, so,
How's
we're-
that going? I mean, I haven't got any feedback yet.
Might be a real disaster. You should come and voice your support.
Not a bad idea, actually.
all right, so we're just gonna have the one item then,
I think that's
2,500 square foot, or are we gonna open that up? Or do you just wanna talk about outdoor commercial cultivation and
Let's
make
just
it
talk
really
about
broad?
outdoor commercial cultivation, and we can get to the
Talk about the
framework of
size
sizing.
later?
Yeah.
Is that all right with you,
I mean, because
Joel?
I'd like to see it up a little bit higher than 2,500 square foot to start, but, I mean,
Okay.
that's just what more debate to talk about, I guess. Ramifications of that.
Yeah, just outdoor cultivation, we're not talking about a number. Here we have 2,500 square foot license type. I'm just gonna agendize it broadly, discuss outdoor commercial cultivation. Okay,
Sounds good to me.
excellent. All done? Any final public comment? Oh, yes, Wednesday, we're trying to, I did actually schedule the next meeting too, so it's already been scheduled. We got the boardroom reserved for next Wednesday, the same time, 10 o'clock next Wednesday. Oh, that's tonight. Right here. Yeah. Planning Commission here tonight, 6 o'clock, to talk about the retail and manufacturing ordinance. And then we'll meet here in a week. That'll be 9/12, right? That's our next Wednesday? September 12th. All right. All right, very good. Meeting adjourned.